All right, to start off some material creation, I'm going to bring in two files with part of the Barcelona Pavilion, which is available for download on my website if you wanted to follow along. I have two things, the travertine, and then I have a bump map for that. And I've already created a folder by right-clicking and saying New Folder in my Unreal file called Textures. So here I'll just drag and drop these two textures in and give that a second. There we go. Failed to import. I actually grabbed my text file. Don't need that, just need these two. The next thing I'm going to do is go to my materials. I'm going to right click and create a new material, and this one will be travertine. There we go. It's been a long day. So I open my travertine material, and I'm going to start plugging some stuff in. So if I hit T and left click, I'll get a texture sample. And that texture I'm going to set to my diffuse, which is the, let's see which one of these it needs to be. ZZA, Object 4. There we go. I grabbed the right one. And so here on these nodes, I have all the color samples, red channel, green channel, blue channel, and alpha channel. So here I'm just going to connect my base image to the travertine color. I'm also going to hit T again and bring in another texture sample. This texture is going to be the bump map, and I'm going to run that through what we talked about in class is a lerp. So hitting L and left clicking, I'll bring up a lerp. And this is a linear interpretation that I'm going to use to set my essentially bump map. So let's see where we're going to do that. We can actually use it for the roughness here. We don't have a normal map. That isn't something that we created, so we'll just go with roughness, and in the white spots it'll be rougher than the black. And because this is just a black and white image, I'm going to use my red channel as my alpha. I'll hit 1 for a 1 vector variable. I'll hit it again, so we have 2 of those. And I'll connect that to A and B, and we'll say that our roughness is 0 to 1, and I'll plug that into roughness. And all that should do is just bring a little bit of highlight and gloss to the object, and we're seeing a little bit there. Without that, if I were to disconnect that, break lines, you can see we don't have any of those reflections, those little glinting lights. So I'll plug that into roughness. And that's all we really need to do for the time being. So if I save this material, I hadn't set up any texture mapping, so I'll close my material. And so if I drag the travertine onto the base of the model, you can see it's incredibly large. It's not mapped in any way. That's something I'd have to take care of in Rhino. So if I jump back to my travertine, the one thing I'm going to do is to right click and say texture coordinate. So here, this is just a really very basic way that I might control the U and V's of the sample. It was very, very large, so let's say that we're going to need to tile it 10 times. So here in our sample, we can see there's actually some grooves now. Let's go to a flat panel. Zoom in, come on. There we go. So the tile's now textured differently. So we'll save this one more time and see if we can have something closer to what we want on the ground. And we do, but you can see the angle of the texture is incorrect. It's running at a slight biased. So, again, we could go in here, and I think we can adjust some of that. No, it's only mirroring, so it's not something that we can rotate in Unreal Engine. That texture mapping needs to be done in Rhino. But while we're here, let's look at a couple other materials. Travertine was an easy one. That's one we made with texture. I did the same thing previously with concrete. But let's look at metal. Metal is set up in a way that the base color is just a color. So here, what I did was use a 3 constant vector. So I hit 3 and left click. Then I can set my color here. So if I wanted something that was a green metal, I could replace this color with green. We'll see that it updates here. The metallic color is just a 1 vector. So I just hit 1, left click, and I set it to 1. My metallic shiny is a 1.0. The next thing I did was to bring in the scratches texture that we had generated in class. And I'm using that again in a lerp file, and using the red as the alpha. And then I'm telling it that I don't want it to be perfectly shiny or perfectly matte. So I'm controlling the kind of bounds of this to be from 0.1 to 0.8. And what that does here, you can see there's some scratches in the metal. And if I were to do away with this, if I were to break this off, you would see that the metal is perfectly matte at the time being. And so it's got some shine to it. But as soon as I come in and add this lerp in, we build in some roughness based off this texture, and we have a much more realistic looking metal. So metals are pretty easy. It really depends on what kind of the color is or what your scratches are. We can control this. So if I went and changed this back to 1.0, you can see that we've got a little bit more shine on it. If I drop this guy up to 0.5, it should bring everything up fairly matte, but still we have scratches. You can see those there. So we'll save that for now, and that's our metal texture. And lastly, and probably most complicated, we'll take a look at the glass. So glass is using the Fresnel system, which is something we spent some time about. Again, I'm just setting a color for the glass, which is kind of this whitish gray. Glass is also kind of a metallic characteristic. There is a shine to it. It works best that way. So I've set glass to be a metallic condition of 1.0. Here I've set my roughness to be 0. And then I had to go in and get a Fresnel function under miscellaneous. And that's what you see here. The only thing I needed to set was power. The power of the Fresnel is just the way mathematically the model solves the system. There's two things we're doing. One, the refraction characteristics are driven by the Fresnel, but so is the opacity of the glass. And if I look, I'll just go to a sheet here and see if we can rotate around. Because this has no thickness, we're not going to see it, but if we went to a cube, we should. The edges are a little bit more solid than the middle. We're not really seeing much in this scene, but that's how it's working. So the opacity is a lerp between 0.15 and 0.9, and the refraction is 1.2 to 0.8. So when I bake that in, we can, oh, the last thing I meant to mention, sorry, is when I click this base material aggregator, I need to make sure that it's set to a translucent material here, and then down under translucency, I've set it to volumetric directional. And that way, glass responds the way you would, and it would bend objects that are behind it. So we'll save that back up. We can close this material as soon as it's done saving. And then if we go in and look, our glass material, which has no thickness at all, so it's going to be difficult for it to actually bend anything. Let's do this. Let's just put in a cube into our scene. We'll move it up into space. It's actually outside of our space. There we go. And I'll apply the glass material to that. Because this is volumetric, it will actually bend and distort the light in the way you would expect glass to. So we can actually reduce its size. Let's just go 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. And now as I look around that piece of glass, it bends the objects behind. So that's a really quick introduction into the basics of materiality for Unreal. We'll be getting in this more and more. I think we also need to talk about how we control the textures in Rhinoceros and bring them back in to Unreal as something that has a texture map applied, but I'll save that for the next tutorial.